Okay, welcome to our Tuesday night Torah class. I appreciate all you guys being here. Let me open with a word of prayer. Father God, thank you for the day. Just thank you for the blessings that we received today. Thank you for taking care of us. And thank you for this group of people that found time in their lives to come out and study your Torah. I'd ask that you'd be with us tonight as we read your word and help us to look in it honestly and openly. And I know you have something for each one of us to take away. And I appreciate the fact that you work in our hearts. I appreciate the fact that you've knit us together as a family. And I appreciate the Torah. I appreciate that you've shown us how important it is, how it really is the word of life. In Yeshua's name, amen. So let's see. Tonight, I think we're going to get to John's favorite chapter. But first, we're in Genesis chapter 26, which is Isaac and Abimelech. Genesis chapter 26. Last week, we talked about the death of Abraham. Actually, it was the week before last we did that. But last week, we talked about Jacob and Esau. And the way Esau ended up getting the birthright. You remember the story about him getting the birthright? Esau comes in from a big hunting trip and he's famished. And Jacob is cooking the stew and he says, I'll trade you my birthright for a bowl of stew. More to it than that. I appreciate the comment that was made last week about the backstory that might or might not have gone along with that. About how Esau coming in and saying that he was famished, and I'd always kind of assumed that that was something a teenage boy would say. You know, man, I'm just about to starve to death here, so what good's a birthright to me? You know, I'll trade it for the... I mean, like I say, I've been there. I would have done stupid things like that. But on the other hand, there's the backstory that could go along with that he really was in fear for his life and really did think that he might be killed. Makes it a little more believable. But in any case, that's what he did, and that's what we talked about. So now Jacob has the birthright, and Esau does not. Now, it's my understanding, and we can talk about this more, it's my understanding that what the birthright is a typical, the typical way an estate would be divided would be, in these times, would be that when the patriarch died, his sons, his property would be divided into the number of sons he has plus one shares. So if he had 6 sons, he'd divide his property into 7 shares. And the eldest son would get 2 shares. And that's what's called the birthright. He's got 2 shares, and he also gets the role of leadership in the family. As the eldest son, he's the one whose job it is to take over the family and to be responsible for guiding the family, making family decisions and all of that. The other 6 sons in this case, or 5 sons, get their share and they can do with them what they want. And hopefully they tend to all stay together as a big family. But that's kind of the way, my understanding. It may not be right. And if you have evidence of something different, we can talk about it. But anyway, that's what the birthright is. So this week we have this little funny chapter, chapter 26. It's unusual in that the main reason, I mean, when you get through reading the chapter, you ask yourself, why is that there? So let's read the chapter and then we can ask, why is that there? So would somebody like to read Genesis chapter 26? Let's read it up through verse 18, the first 18 verses of Genesis chapter 26. Somebody feel like doing that? John, he almost raised his hand, but he didn't really.
I saw that. You better watch out.
Yeah. Anybody volunteer? Okay.
Want me to read?
Nope. Well, we had a volunteer over here. Sarah did. I'm all for letting the volunteers do this, you know.
26, 1 through 18. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the previous famine that had occurred in the days of Abraham. So Isaac went to Gerar, to Abimelech, king of the Philistines. The Lord appeared to him and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Stay in the land of which I shall tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you and bless you, for to you and to your descendants I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath which I swore to your father Abraham. I will multiply your descendants as the stars of heaven, and will give your descendants all these lands. And by your descendants all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and kept my charge, my commandments, my statutes, and my laws." So Isaac lived near Gerar. When the men of the place asked about his wife, he said, "She is my sister." For he was afraid to say my wife, thinking the men of the place might kill me on account of Rebekah, for she is beautiful. It came about when he had been there a long time that Abimelech, the king of the Philistines, looked out through a window and saw, and behold, Isaac was caressing his wife Rebekah. Then Abimelech called Isaac and said, "Behold, certainly she is your wife. How then did you say she is my sister?" And Isaac said to him, "Because I said I might die on account of her." Abimelech said, "What is this you have done to us? One of the people might easily have lain with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." So Abimelech charged all the people, saying, "He who touches this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." Now Isaac sowed in that land and reaped in the same year 100-fold. And the Lord blessed him, and the man became rich, and continued to grow richer until he became very wealthy. For he had possessions of flocks and herds and a great household, so that the Philistines envied him. Now all of the wells which his father's servant had dug in the days of Abraham his father, the Philistines stopped by filling them with earth. Then Abimelech said to Isaac, "Go away from us, for you are too powerful for us." And Isaac departed from there and camped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Then Isaac dug again the wells of water which had been dug in the days of his father Abraham, for the Philistines had stopped them up after the death of Abraham. And he gave them the same names which his father had given them.
Okay. So the story has a familiar ring to it, right? I mean, we've encountered this same story in different forms twice before, right? Once we had it when Abraham and Sarah went down to Egypt, and that was how they acquired, among other things, Sarah's handmaiden Hagar, right? But then we found it again, I don't have the exact chapter number, but when Abraham and Sarah were also going down to this very same place, and they introduced, Abraham introduced Sarah as his sister to Abimelech, okay? So why is this story here? Let's talk about it first of all. It says, it's careful in verse 26, or chapter 26, it says, there was another famine in the land besides the earlier famine in Abraham's time. So this is clearly different, right? It's saying it's not the same one. So Isaac had lived, or was living at the time in Beersheba, and it says he went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines, in Gerar. I didn't bring a map. Beersheba is kind of in the middle south of Israel. Do you know where Gerar is from there? Everybody has an idea, geographically? It's essentially a little southwest from Beersheba. It's out toward the Mediterranean, and it's where Gaza is today. Gerar, if we could do this and went over there and found the proper place to do an archaeological dig in Gaza, we could find Gerar. So that's kind of where it is. And so when he gets to Gerar, he runs into Abimelech. Now, remember the discussion we had about Abimelech? You suppose this is the same guy that Abraham ran into? What do you
Yeah,
think?
I don't know.
Don't
It's
know.
more like a title, I think.
Yep. Abimelech is what it is. Abimelech is how we usually pronounce it, but it's Abimelech. What does Abimelech mean?
Father
Abi
King.
is father, Melech is king. So it's
Can I-
father king, so it's probably a title. Yeah.
Well, a couple of things. The fact that it mentioned that it's a different famine. Well, Abraham's already dead, isn't he?
Yeah.
So I don't know why the Bible points that out.
Well, I do. I don't know. My theory is because they don't want you to think this is the same story told again. They want you to realize that this is Isaac in this story, not Abraham. Because it does have that feel. I remember the first time I read it and compared it to the one that I felt like I read just last week.
Deja vu all over again.
Yeah. I says, well, this is obviously a kind of a manuscript error here because they just had the same story. They didn't know who did it, so they thought they'd put it in twice.
I thought it was to build some sort of bizarre structure or something, chiastic
It
structure.
could be
Maybe.
that too.
Well, in verse 2 it says, and Yahweh appears to him like he's putting up a stop sign. He says, don't go any farther. Don't go to Egypt.
Yep.
So he never does leave Egypt.
Nope.
Or, I mean, he never does
Never does
leave the
leave,
promised
yeah.
land.
But that's a very good point. I caught that too. It's like he's on his way, and God basically stops him and says, don't go to Egypt. And then analyze what else he says there. What do any of those words look familiar? Don't go to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live, and stay in this land for a while, and I'll be with you. And then starting with and bless you.
Yeah, it's the same thing he told Abraham.
Yeah, it's the Abrahamic covenant. It's the same promise that God made to Abraham, only now he's making it to Isaac, right? And he says the same thing. He says, I'll give this land to you and your descendants. I'll confirm the oath that I swore to Abraham. I'll make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I'll give them all these lands, and through your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. So that's the essential content of Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, is that's what God promised Abraham right in the beginning. I remember one time in some class I was taking, somebody daringly pointed out that Genesis 12, 1 through 3 is the most important verses in the Bible, because it talks about, those, you can rest the whole rest of the Bible on those verses, because that's what God's been doing from Genesis chapter 12 clear through the rest of the Bible, is that. It's a way to look at it. But verse 5, note verse 5. What's interesting about that? Joe? Just a sec. Wait. Okay.
Okay, it says, because Abraham obeyed my voice and observed my safeguards, my commandments, my decrees, and my Torahs. Torahs is in the plural.
Yeah, laws. Is what that, okay. So, but what it says is God is explaining why he's doing this. And why is he doing it? It's not because Isaac was obedient, it says. It's because Abraham was. He says, I'm fulfilling my promise to Abraham, and we'll follow this through. And God says that over and over again. It's not just once or twice, but he says it all through the Tanakh, the Torah. He says, I'm doing this because of my promise to Abraham. So it really is. I think that's kind of fascinating. Yes?
Well, the promise was to Abraham's seed, too.
Yeah.
So that's what he's fulfilling here.
He basically, but I just think you're right, but it's like, don't forget that I made the promise to the one in the beginning, So it's the same promise. I'm not making a new promise to you. It's that same one. One of the things I got this time as I was reading it that I was kind of interested about is he said, verse 5, because Abraham obeyed me. The translations are different here. Mine says obeyed me and kept my requirements, my commands, my decrees, and my laws. That sounds like what they usually call that's all over Exodus, right? What is that?
Can I do the Hebrew?
Beg your pardon?
Can I do the Hebrew?
Sure.
So kept is like shomer. Shemor is how it's actually said. My charge is mishmati, Mishmarti. Mitzvotah, that's the commandments.
Yep.
Kukotai, statutes, and Vetorti. I'm sorry, Vetorte.
That's probably
Torah,
Torah's.
and Torah, yeah.
Yeah, Torah. So the thing that's interesting about that, to me, is that it indicates that Abraham knew the Torah, which is pretty amazing since the Torah hadn't been given yet, right? This is 400 years before the Torah was essentially given to Moses. So there's a lot of things that are kind of interesting when you think about that. First of all, at first I kind of reacted negatively in that, and I said, well, something's got to be wrong here, because that's the guys that are writing this stuff after Moses that put that in there. But then, as we talked about before, when you think about the fact that starting with Abraham told Isaac all the stuff that was before chapter 12 of Genesis, all about Adam and Eve and Noah, and all that stuff had to come down through the word of mouth. And evidently, God had told Abraham that, because Abraham taught Isaac, and then they kept passing it down until Moses. The thing that Moses did that was different is he wrote it. He actually wrote the thing. In Deuteronomy, it says that. He wrote this. So I guess when you think about it in that light, the fact that Abraham knew the Torah is not all that surprising. Yeah.
What Joe was talking about, the plurality of Torah.
Torahs, yeah.
Torah, yeah. Judaism claims, it's some places like that, I'm not sure if that's it or not, that's the oral Torah and the written Torah.
Could
Now,
be.
I don't have my notes with me, and I don't know if this is the place or not, but Nehemiah Gordon disputes that, so
Yeah.
anyway.
What makes you think that Abraham, are you saying that you think Abraham was the first one to know basically the Torah laws? Because I would have thought that, we're many generations removed from Adam and Eve. It would have been explained to Adam and Eve what they needed to do, and it was passed down from them all the way.
Yep.
That's
No,
what
I
I would
agree with
think.
you. I'm not saying anything that's different than that. I'm saying that too. And the other thing that makes me think is when we think of the Torah, I should not say me. When I think of the Torah, for a long time, all I thought about was, Genesis through Deuteronomy. All these words, all this written stuff, some of these archaic and real difficult to understand commands. But when you start thinking about the Torah as, mostly stories and all the things that happened and the things that God obviously wants you to pick up about Him and about His plan for humanity and about how He wants us to act, the Torah is not really, it's more than that. It's more than just the words in the first 5 books. It's a lot deeper than that. And I think Adam and Eve and Abraham probably got that in quotes. They understood the Torah probably better than we do. Not because they had all the words, because they didn't. But somehow or another, God was able to impress upon them in a way that was deeper, and so they understood the Torah more fully than we do. If you get my meaning, yeah.
They didn't have all the distractions.
Yeah, they didn't have to go through this pesky English. Polly's got something. Just a second.
I have a question that I could probably do the math on, but maybe you've already looked at this. So you mentioned that Avimelech is more of a title.
Mm-hmm.
So who we're reading about in chapter 25, are you thinking this is a different individual than who we read about in chapter 20?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just he's just being called by his title, not referring to the name of the same person?
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I'll say it in this way. There's certainly a real possibility that it is the same person, because the distance in time is not that many years. On the other hand, I think that I can show through kind of circumstantial evidence that it probably is just as likely that it's his son. because I think we can show that he is aware of Abraham and Abraham's God and Abraham's covenant, and was aware of that whenever Isaac came wandering through his country, so to speak.
Well, when we look at 20, it seems like if it's in like a timeline that we're looking at here, 20 seems to happen, I don't know, I'm trying to look, when I looked at it earlier, it seems like that isn't Isaac not even born yet, I think?
That could be.
And so I'm looking, if he's not even been born yet, because the birth of Isaac happened, we read about in chapter 21, and then we read not too long ago that Isaac was 40-something and met Rebekah, and then Esau, we determined, was about 15 when the stew story takes place, so that puts him about 55 years old.
Yep.
So that would mean, I'm just thinking, this is 55 years since this story occurred with Abraham-ish.
Yep. Yeah, no,
And
I
guess
agree.
it could be.
It could
Could
be.
be the
Like
same.
what I say,
Or the son.
Given that these guys lived 150, 175 years, some of them, it could be. I think it is more likely that it is not. But it is very likely that this Abimelech knew of Isaac's father. Maybe not through personal experience, but through history, through stories that his father might have told him. Just a second.
Let's see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm over here.
Yeah.
Isaac was 60 when Esau and Jacob were born. So if they were 15 with the stew story,
Yeah.
that'd have been 75 years plus.
Plus however old he was in the
yeah.
beginning. It's becoming
So-
more and more unlikely that it's
Yeah.
the same Abimelech.
And I think maybe maybe famines were far in between. So,
Good point.
the previous famine was like maybe once a century they have a big famine or something,
Yeah.
Kind of like they have the Mississippi floods once every so often.
Except when they happen more often than that. Yeah, no, I understand exactly what you're saying. And,
Except
and you're probably right. The thing is many of the commentaries actually say that. They say, no,
I might
this
be
is
right,
not-
but I'm never wrong.
They actually say, this is not the same Abimelech. They just assume that. But I think, it doesn't really say that. You have to kind of deduce that on your own. And it's not that important, really, but...
Okay, a few minutes earlier, a while ago, you said that Abraham knew the Torah. Okay, evidently he did, because of all the previous action that God done, the flood and all the other things through Noah. So somehow or the other, through his intellect or whatever, he got into that, and so he knew, or I think he would have known, that what God has said. So when God called him, he was relying back on all those experiences that he heard.
No, that could be. Yeah, I don't see anything wrong with that. There's another thing that goes on here that I think I just thought about. Well, let's read on for a second. So why does it say that Isaac tried to pass Rebekah off as his sister? Yeah, it says right here, it's because he was afraid that I'd get murdered. They'd kill me in order to take my wife. And so in order to do that, I'm going to introduce you as my sister. Now, first of all, there's the correct term is equivocating here, because in this culture, you could call your cousin your sister, because you are related. And Rebekah was related to Isaac. But technically, there's no way that she was his blood sister. She was a cousin, right? So there's that. But the other thing is where, let's see, how can I put this? What got me to thinking about it was this. How did Isaac get discovered as having tried to pull this fast one on Abimelech with Rebekah? This is an easy question. How did he get found out?
They were making out.
Yeah, they were making out down there, and Abimelech saw it, right? And Abimelech, his reaction is...
What's Hebrew for making out?
Yeah, Hebrew. Canoodling. We need the Hebrew equivalent of canoodling. Anyway, Abimelech says, it says, it was a trap. You were laying a trap for me. I'm upset with you. Now, that assumes that Abimelech understands the fact that someone's taking Isaac's wife would have been illegal, would have been an affront. But I got to thinking about this. What if this took place in Egypt 400 years later? And somebody looked down and saw this guy, canoodling with his sister. Canoodling? In Egypt, they did that. In Egypt, guys married their sister. At least that's what I've been told. I think it probably happened in the royal family more than just anybody. But I guess my point is this implies that somehow or another, Abimelech knew that this was wrong behavior. Whereas I think a lot of those cultures around there would not have necessarily known that this was wrong behavior. Go ahead, Mike.
This story seems a little bit different in that in the Abraham story, it's the king who notices Sarah and wants her for his wife. In this case, it seems like it's just the average people who are saying, "Hey, who's the woman?" And
Yep.
he's like, it's my sister."
Yeah.
So seemed to be no real confrontation with the king. The king just happened to see him with his wife.
Yeah,
And put
you're
two and two
exactly right,
together.
but that makes it even more remarkable. Because basically, the king is upset about the fact that Isaac was trying to pull off this subterfuge, this pass his wife off as his sister, and he wants to know why you did that. As a matter of fact, he says down there, he says, verse 10, "What is this you have done to us? One of the men might well have slept with your wife, and you would have brought guilt upon us." Well, like I say, I'm not too sure where he gets the idea that would have brought guilt upon us, except from Abraham and Isaac. Right? Just a thought. Yes.
Okay. In number 12, it says that 2012. It says that she was his sister from the father.
Yeah.
That's what it says.
Yeah, that was Sarah and Abraham, right? For Sarah was Abraham's half sister. According to you can kind of substantiate that in the Torah that Sarah was Abraham's sister, but we know exactly how Rebekah was related to Isaac, and Rebekah's relationship to Isaac was first cousin. Maybe second cousin. Because, let's see if I get this right. Rebekah's grandfather was Abraham's brother. I think that's right. Or maybe it was Rebekah's father was Abraham's brother, one of the two. In any case, we know the relationship, and we know that Rebekah is clearly not Isaac's sister or even half-sister. He's her cousin. She's her cousin. They're cousins.
It's a very similar story.
Anyway, all of this is just things to think about. John.
With Abimelech, he has an intervention from God, doesn't he?
He has what?
With Abimelech, the original Abimelech.
The first one,
The
yeah.
first one.
Yeah.
He experiences a very serious threat.
Exactly.
But this one doesn't. There's no threat at all.
No. As a matter of fact, like I say, it's my theory that this one has been told of the experience that his father had.
Right.
And he says, if you ever run across this God that these guys believe in, be careful, because this guy can do it. So don't, and I think, honestly, this story shows that Isaac is being treated with a great deal of respect, at least partially because there is knowledge of Abraham and Abraham's behavior and Abraham's God in the history of the Philistines. They know about it. That's my theory. So you guys can push back on that if you want. Anyway, let's move on here. So before he gets caught in it, before Abimelech II makes a mistake and tries to put the moves on Rebekah, he catches what's going on, and verse 11, he says, "So Abimelech gave orders to all the people, anyone who molests this man or his wife shall surely be put to death." So he's, to me, this looks like someone who says, "Ooh, my dad warned me about this, and we're staying clear. You guys leave these people alone, because we don't want, you remember what happened to Abimelech the first in his household? All their wombs were closed." And there's a lot of discussion about what that really means, but it was a big enough affair that it's remembered, and it's been remembered here these 75 years later, I guess. I think that's kind of cool. You can figure all that out. Anyway, so they move right along into other stuff here. Verse 12, Isaac plants crops in the ground, and that same year reaped 100-fold because Yahweh had blessed him. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until he became very wealthy. Now, John.
Well, this is something that Mark had brought up
Okay.
a couple years ago. Don't forget, this is in the middle of a drought,
Yeah,
and he's got 100-fold increase.
yeah. Pretty interesting, huh?
Is Midas his middle name? They say he's got a green thumb instead of a golden thumb or something?
Well, I was going to say, why do you suppose he was so blessed?
He knew permaculture. Biblical permaculture.
He knew permaculture. Payoff from whom? From all this. Okay, well, could be. I think he was basically blessed because he was obedient to God. God basically said, "Don't go to Egypt," and he said, "Okay." Now, God certainly didn't tell him to introduce Rebekah as his sister, but yeah, John.
Isaac, of the three patriarchs, Isaac is kind of the least mentioned.
Yes. Yes.
And there's theories that, well, he wasn't really as impressive, I guess, or he didn't, I don't know how to say it right. He just wasn't, what I'm getting at is, he does the thing that his father does, and this guy, Abimelech II, it's good on him, because he protected
Yeah.
Isaac.
Yeah.
And Isaac doesn't even, whatever.
Yeah.
And then he gets, I don't know how he gets 100-fold increase.
Yeah.
And everybody else is like, so it's almost like life is too easy for Isaac.
Yeah.
Compared to the other two.
Other than
And therefore he didn't teach Esau and Jacob as well as
that's
they
not
should
bad.
have.
That's not bad. I think the only thing you can look at with Isaac is the life-changing event he obviously had when he went up on Mount Moriah with his dad. That was the big deal in Isaac's life. So I guess that was probably traumatic enough that he gets a get out of jail free card for the rest of this stuff. I'm just being silly, but anyway, let's go on with the story. Would somebody like to read from? Well, let's see. We got to finish here. The man became rich, and his wealth continued to grow until I'm in verse 13. Until he became very wealthy. He had so many flocks and herds and servants that the Philistines envied him. So all the wells that his father's servants had dug in the time of his father Abraham, the Philistines stopped up, filling them with earth. That's an interesting thing. I mean, yeah. So basically, here's Isaac sitting around, living on the outskirts of Gerar, and doing very well, thank you very much. His crops do 100-fold, and he's just really doing good. And the Philistines began to envy him. Now, envy is the word that's used there. I suppose we could do a drill down on that word a little bit. But envy is probably close to what's needed meaning there. It's just that they began to want to, if you will, fight back. Quite frankly, it says here later, they're afraid they're going to become too strong. So they're looking around, the Abimelechians are looking around, and they're seeing Isaac just really prospering. And they think, man, this upstart's going to, outnumber us and take over. We can't have this. So what do? They go around and fill up his wells. So it looks like. They go around and fill up his wells. Now you can imagine how important that would be. The area down there by Gaza is kind of like it is here. If you don't have a well, you're not going to do
It won't
very
go well?
Yeah. Yeah. Are there any thoughts about that, John?
Yes, it was brilliant.
And it
God, what it was.
And it went away. I hate that. That happens to me all the time.
I'm curious, did the Philistines act the same towards Abraham? I mean, the jealousy. Or was Abraham a better diplomat in dealing with the locals, I guess?
No, I think if we go back and look at the Abraham
They had the same thing with the Philemon, or whatever the guy's name was.
Fical.
Fecal, yeah,
Yeah.
that guy.
Yeah. No, as a matter of fact, he's still around here too. But the thing that's interesting is that I think you can show that in both cases, the Philistines were kind of like, I don't know about this. You know, we see how well you're doing. We have respect for your God because you clearly know something that we don't know. But we don't want you to get too close. You know, we don't want you. We're not really that comfortable with you around.
But that's really silly because if the economy's going well for those people, it's going to go well for everybody that's around them. It seems to me.
Well, yeah.
Unless you're like a mercantile theory of.
Well, I mean, you know, that's because you're not. You haven't been trained in the fine art of Machiavellian politics. You know, we don't. We're not. It's not about money. It's about control. Isaac could very easily win these people over because if you learn to do things Isaac's way, you can prosper. Why don't you come away from that old?
That's true.
I'm just making this up, but you get
No,
the
that's
idea.
reasonable.
Yeah, the Philistines were guerrilla warfare
Yeah.
because Abraham or Isaac had all these flocks and all the agriculture advantage. And if the Philistines, well, if I can stop the water from
Yeah.
flowing, everything is going to die. And Isaac's not going to have anything.
Yeah.
So if he's not going to have anything, we don't have to fear him.
Yeah. If he doesn't have anything, his appeal goes way down. To say nothing of the fact that he doesn't have enough soldiers to cause any threat. Yeah. Well, let's go on and read a little bit more, and then we'll go through another passage here. So this obviously bothering Abimelech. In verse 16, he goes to Isaac and he says, "Move away from us because you have become too powerful for us." So Isaac moved away from there and encamped in the valley of Gerar and settled there. Isaac reopened the wells that had been dug in the time of his father Abraham, which the Philistines had stopped up after Abraham died, and he gave them the same names as his father had given them. So he's back just basically doing what Abraham had done 75 years ago, it looks like. Polly's got something.
Isn't this a similar pattern to the Pharaoh that when Moses was born?
Yeah, I suppose.
So my question is about the wells.
Uh-huh.
I don't recall reading where Abraham was ever in, are we saying Gerar?
Gerar.
Gerar? And it says that this story starts out in 26 that he's already in Gerar, but he moves to the valley of Gerar.
Yeah.
So I am thinking on the map, being Gerar is in between Beersheba and the Mediterranean, that he must be going down into a valley, because if I look on the map, Gerar and Beersheba is only about 20-ish miles apart,
Yep.
maybe 25, okay?
Yep.
So it looks like he's going down in this valley towards Beersheba, but somehow his father has dug wells even into this area where he's at.
Uh-huh.
Because now, as you're going to read on a little bit more, it talks more about these wells that were
Yep.
dug. So Abraham must have been in this valley where he's dwelling, or
Yeah.
nearby somewhere, because it's not too far from where he dwelt in Beersheba.
Yep. That's my opinion too. Is basically, and it was always a game of taking the flocks around to wherever they could get something to eat. And so there was quite a bit of moving around. And I'm sure that's where that they both lived down in that same general area. And the distances aren't that great. I've driven from Beersheba to the Mediterranean. It might be a little more than 20 or 25 miles, but it's not much more. Yeah, okay. So the point is all of that stuff is walking around with your sheep distance kind of a thing. I mean, it might be a couple days thing, but it's not bad. And so I'm not, and it's clear that this is where Isaac was in the same place his father was doing this.
What would be the purpose of filling the wells after Abraham died?
Aha, good point. Anybody have any ideas about that?
Ownership? Claim of ownership?
Is the main thing, is claim of ownership. It does two things. It makes, the main thing, first thing it does is it makes the land kind of worthless. Because if there's no well, then who cares, right? If there's no well, then we can't take our animals there because there's no water for them to drink. But it also then throws up the whole ownership of the land thing. You know, the guy that used to have the land, dug the wells, and raised his animals on it. Okay, he's not around anymore. The wells have been filled up, so who knows whose this land is? You know, it's up for grabs, so to speak.
It's their attempt to remove the covenant.
Oh, really? You think? Okay.
Well, Beersheba is the...
Yeah, the well of the covenant. That's certainly one good thing. Yeah, I think you can show that the Philistines had this kind of love-hate relationship with the Israelites, certainly with the patriarchs, all through. You know, because they, I guess by the time you get to Samson and some of that kind of stuff, it was more out-and-out warfare. But toward the beginning, they were always kind of respectful enemies. You know, they realized that I think, I'm going to make this up entirely. I think the Philistines were probably physically imposing. You know, they were warriors and they were big. The Israelites, not so much. But the Israelites had a God that blessed them. And the Philistines, while they like to think they did, really didn't. So I think the Philistines were afraid of the Israelites from that perspective. I think the Israelites were afraid of the Philistines because of their physical prowess. And that's just my opinion. But it kind of makes sense. So let's go on. Are there any other comments? We can start in verse 19. Let's see. Well, why don't we just read from 19 to the end of the chapter, and we'll go dissect all of that. Somebody want to read from verse 19 to the end of the chapter? Okay, I will. How about that? You were looking for someone. You did good, John. You just couldn't find anybody. Okay, starting in verse 19. Isaac's servants dug in the valley and discovered a well of fresh water there. But the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdsmen and said, "The water is ours." So he named the well Esek, which means dispute, because they disputed with him. Then they dug another well, but they quarreled over that one also, and so he named it Sitnah, which means opposition. He moved on from there and dug another well, and no one quarreled over it, and so he named it Rehoboth, saying, "Now the Lord has given us room, and we will flourish in the land." From there he went up to Beersheba. That night the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not be afraid, for I am with you. I will bless you, and I will increase the number of your descendants for the sake of my servant Abraham." Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of Yahweh. He pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well. Meanwhile, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath, his personal advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. Isaac asked them, "Why have you come to me, since you were hostile to me and sent me away?" And they answered, "We saw clearly that Yahweh was with you, so we said, 'There ought to be a sworn agreement between us and you. Let us make a treaty with you that you will do us no harm, just as we did not molest you, but always treated you well and sent you away in peace. And now you are blessed by Yahweh.' So Isaac made then a feast for them, and they ate and drank. Early the next morning the men swore an oath to each other, and then Isaac sent them on their way, and they left him in peace. That day Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug. They said, 'We have found water,' and so he called it Sheba, and to this day the name of the town is Beersheba." Okay, I'm going to stop there because I want to say the last verse for other stuff. So let's talk about it. Verses 19 through 22 is this little parable, if you will, about the wells, about how they went out and they dug a well, and they have a big dispute with the Philistines because they say, well, that's our land, that's our well. And so they named the well Dispute. And then they named the other well Opposition. And then they finally get one that's far enough away that the Philistines don't come and argue with them, and so they call that Rehoboth, which means room, or roomy, if you will. Does anybody have any idea how that applies? I've struggled with that a lot. I just wonder if anybody had any thoughts on the names of the wells. They're obviously there for a reason.
Well, I could segue into what later is talking about later on.
Okay. Well, you can if you want.
Well, it's just more. Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, you'll wait. All right. Mark's got something. He's feeling sorry for me.
Maybe one of the things that we should be praying for as a people coming into our identity, well, I'll say three things. As a community in this building, the fact that we're looking for land here in this country, but we also want land of where our forefathers are. So maybe we should be praying for Rehoboth.
Yeah.
Lord, make room for us.
Yeah. Yeah, one explanation I heard for these was they kind of mirror Israel's history. First there's dispute, then there's opposition, and then there's room. I could kind of buy that one. John?
I guess I would look at the number. There's three. Three is, well, truth is established by two or three,
Yeah.
and three has a powerful meaning itself, but I don't know.
Yeah. Joe?
Is it true that other places where altars are made and other things are given names?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's your point?
Okay, so if the name of the wells, each name has to have a special meaning, it's almost like a altar to God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I just was wondering what the meanings meant. I was wondering, it's a simple paragraph. It's like, 3 verses, and it names 3 wells, and something different happened at each well. And I was just wondering if there was some parable, some kind of a story that you could draw from that. I'm not any better at it than you are.
Just don't give up. Keep going.
Yeah,
Just because it fails the first time.
Yeah.
Like-
I certainly try again.
My friend-
Try again, right?
My friend Richard said, well, I read the Bible once, and that was it. Nothing happened. So,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, you got to study it. You got to own it. You got to keep going at it.
You
It's not
really
just
figure
like-
this thing out. Yeah.
You don't need the crib sheets. You just keep going.
Enough of that. Let's move on, verse 23. So he goes up to Beersheba, which you could argue is where he started a couple of years earlier. That night, Yahweh appeared to him and said, I'm the God of your father Abraham. Don't be afraid, for I'm with you. I'll bless you and increase your number. Now, this is all a repeat yet again of the covenant that God made, the promise that God made to Abraham. John?
I think it's interesting the way they describe that, because a few verses back, whenever the Lord appeared to him, he didn't say anything about do not fear him.
That's a good point.
And so I think that's very interesting that he said that this time.
Yeah. I hadn't noticed that. That's true. I bet, we do see that a lot, though. When God makes an appearance to someone, that's usually one of the first things he says is, don't be afraid. But that's a good point. That's a good catch. And so, obviously, it was a momentous occasion in Isaac's life because he builds an altar there in verse 25. Isaac built an altar there and called on the name of Yahweh, and he pitched his tent, and there his servants dug a well, yet again. Meanwhile, in verse 26, Abimelech had come to him from Gerar with Ahuzzath, his personal advisor, and Phicol, the commander of his forces. I don't know whether it's the same Phicol or not, but it's certainly the same name. As we met, Phicol was the
Maybe it's a
commander.
title.
Yeah. It might be a title. Maybe it means general. Anyway. Isaac asked them, I like this, he basically says, welcome, how are you? Then he says, so why have you come to me since you were hostile to me and sent me away? Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was thinking when Isaac named these wells, what did he name them? Would you say the names?
What he named it, the first one was dispute,
Dispute and
opposition,
opposition.
and then room.
Well, I wonder if
Room, plenty of room.
it seems
plenty
like
of space.
word got back to Abimelech that Isaac named these two wells not good names for his people.
Now, that could be.
And this is why he's coming to him now to kind of
That's a good
make
point.
things right.
That could be. That could be. In other words, well, one of the things I thought in looking at this yet again, and even in the story, the similar story with Abraham, is that these Philistines were probably pushing on old Isaac and Abraham and expecting them to, okay, let's go have it out with these guys. And if there's one thing you can say about both Abraham and Isaac, and certainly Jacob, they were not aching for a fight. Isaac, they all were willing to say, whatever, let's just live in peace. We don't need to go to fisticuffs about this. And so a lot of that seems that way. But on the other hand, what you point out is that they're afraid of something. Yeah. Mark's got something.
So you remember when Yeshua states that the Lord God is not a God of the dead, but he's a God of the living? Mm-hmm. And he states Abraham's name, right? In one of the three names he states. What's interesting to me as I was reading this, it says, for the sake of my servant Abraham, almost as if it's present tense, as meaning, he's still serving, or in other words, it's implying living.
Yeah.
Not the guy who used to serve me, but my servant Abraham.
Yeah. There's something to that. Well, like I say, I get a big kick out of thinking about the fact that you can look at it as God is still honoring the promise he made to Abraham. Now, granted, we're all beneficiaries and all that kind of stuff, but he brings it back to our attention all the time. Yeah, that's why he's called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is because Abraham's the guy that he's really trying to honor. Yeah. Big pardon?
I don't know if we're getting some feedback.
Yeah. He's. Let's see. Anyway, so Isaac says, so why have you come to see me since you were hostile to me and sent me away?
Most excellent question.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And that's what I like about, especially the Torah. There's not any mealy-mouthing around here. It's basically, so what brings you here?
Well, my question is, why is he entering into a contract again? Are they indifferent about covenants or something?
Well,
Because
certainly I don't think they understand the covenant the way you do, if you will, because they're willing to make concessions, and they're willing to make commitments, promises to these people.
Yeah, but they're promises to people who aren't holding up their end of the bargain.
Well,
Now, I almost get the impression that either these two are just trying to ensnare him again, or in this case, the son of Abraham, or they just don't have control over the people like they want to, like they should, and they're kind of like, we can't be real nice to you in public because...
much like the Arabs.
Right, we can't have that. We have to put on a show.
Yeah, yeah.
So I just think it, and I don't understand, it's kind of odd the don't fear me, because usually we're told to fear God.
Yeah.
And here it says, no, don't fear God. But I think he should if
It just says don't be afraid.
okay, maybe that's a different word.
But your other point, I think, is an interesting one. Because, you could also argue that we all made a covenant with God, and we haven't been very good about keeping it either. I know, yeah.
Could it also be that because they were much mightier than them, could I go back to that fear factor?
Oh, yeah. I definitely think that's a big part of it. I mean, if the Philistines weren't afraid of them, they wouldn't be doing any of this.
Since he knows our hearts better than we do ourselves, having approached them in many, many situations throughout the Word, not to be afraid, perfect love casts out all fear. He must know that they don't have a perfect belief or trust in
Him.
him,
That's a very good
and
point.
because of that, they're afraid.
Yep. Yeah, well, you know, when you think about it, it's always the case throughout all of Israel's history that they made covenants with untrustworthy people, other countries, because they didn't have faith, right?
Who didn't have faith? The country
The
that stood-
Israelites.
Yeah, that's
That's very true.
then that's not good.
No, that's not good.
So it seems to me what we're being saying or suggesting is that Isaac fears Abimelech and Phicol, whatever
Yeah.
his name is,
Yeah.
instead of fearing Yah, which is
I'll
the
buy
whole
that.
point of the contract. Is the reason I'm fear God because I have a contract with Him, and I don't want to mess that up.
Yeah, I hear you. I think you're right. I think you're right. Margaret has something
That's where
too.
I'm at. Is it just where I'm at?
It seems here that maybe Abimelech has a little more faith in Yahweh than,
And Isaac?
or fear of Yahweh
Yeah.
than Isaac. And
Yeah.
Isaac is pretty much content and he feels secure
Yeah.
in that Yahweh will. Yahweh will. He promised. He appeared to him and promised he'll take care of him. He'll bless him. And I think it's just the fear of Yahweh that Abimelech is
Yeah.
is trying to safeguard his people.
I understand your point. That's a good one.
Also on verse 30, it says that a banquet was prepared for them and they ate and drank, and the next morning they got up and they left after swearing to each other that they were going to be friends.
Yeah.
And then he sent them away on their peacefully, and then it says that very day, Isaac's servants came and told him that the well they had dug, they had found water.
Uh-huh.
That very day.
Yeah.
It's like you do good to your enemies, and that the Lord blesses you even more.
Yep.
Because you can never outgive the Lord. You
Yep.
can do this and you can do that for people. He says, you can't outdo me, and He blesses you even more.
Yeah.
And he was blessed even more than what he was before.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that also kind of opens up a rebuttal to John's argument in that if the Philistines wanted to have a peace treaty with the Israelites, why wouldn't the Israelites do that? You know, yeah, I don't want to have a war with you any worse than you want to have a war with me. Holly.
I probably have a different perspective than John, and it aligns with what Margaret said about Abimelech's fear of the Almighty. And I think this is a king, this is just a perspective to consider. I think this is a king that sees that the God of this man is prospering him, and he is growing in blessing, and he is going to be taking over this country that we live in, and we are going to be his servants someday. So we need to come and make peace with him because the Lord is blessed, his God is blessing him, and we don't want to come in opposition of what his God is doing because we're going to be the ones overtaken.
Yep.
But it's interesting that they end up at this same place where if this is the same man, he made a oath with Isaac's father here at this same place. It has to be a very memorable oath that he made.
But that's
Or maybe it's
that's
just-
a further argument for it not being the same man.
And it could just be this individual knew of the oath that his father made with his father for that same reason, and he is just reestablishing and reminding him that we need to do this again to assure our own safety because you are going to conquer.
Yep. I think you're right. John.
Yeah, I'll concede that Abimelech is looking out for his own interest and is being rational. I don't
Yeah.
have any problem with that.
Yeah.
Shouldn't there at least be a concession? Like, okay, you want to enter, how about you do something to fix, at least attempt, show some effort that you trying to fix the problem in this whole, why you're here in the first place. Like, give me back one of the wells. Some sort of concession. There's no quid pro quo here. It's not even a binding.
I give
It's
you
just-
that. However, I might offer this: the unstated but perhaps intended quid pro quo is, and I'll make sure my guys quit filling up your wells.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not going to go to the mat on that one, but
I'll
I guess,
stop going to war with you if you just sign this contract, please.
Yeah, kind of. I'll quit making your life miserable if you'll just,
Do you think that reinforces them to be miserable later on? Oh, we got nothing. That didn't cost us anything.
I'm not arguing it's a good contract. I'm just
No, I was
trying to make it work.
I was agreeing with you that.
Okay, and I guess that last little thing in verse 32 where it says, Isaac's servants came and told him about the well they had dug, and so they named the place Beersheba. That's the second time we've named it Beersheba, right? So Abraham named it Beersheba, and Isaac named it Beersheba, so it's well and truly Beersheba. Beersheba, yeah. The well of the oath, or the well of seven. The oath and seven are about the same word, yeah.
It's interesting he's naming these wells. I mean,
Yeah.
if you dig a well, you can name it whatever you want. When you leave the area, when you run off, did you leave a sign? Do they even give any credence to the name you gave it?
Well, that's a good, interesting question, but let me go a nice little rabbit trail for just a minute. I remember we used to live in this old community in the mountains in Colorado, and people lived in these little old cabins. And the cabins would change hands, not often, but periodically. And we'd often, we'd be up there and they'd say, well, where do you live? And say, well, I live in the old Smith cabin. And the Smiths hadn't owned it for 3 generations or something, It belonged to the Smiths and the Joneses and then somebody else and then somebody else's, but they kept calling it the Smith cabin because that's who built it. So I'm not arguing with you. I'm just saying, so the names of the well could have stuck. Do you want a microphone? Yeah, kind of like an address. That's okay.
So Beersheba really means 7 oaths.
7, well, Sheba is 7,
That's
beer
right.
is well.
But it can also mean oath.
Beer can mean oath? Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. Great. So then the thing I really wanted to do to get into this next fun thing is verse 34. So here we have all this stuff with Abimelech, right? All this Abimelech stuff, which is fun to dissect and figure out. But chapter 26, verse 34 says, when Esau was 40 years old, he married Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and also Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. They were a great source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. That's a cool sentence. I mean, it's cool from a lot of reasons. First of all, what in the heck is it doing there, right? It has nothing to do with Abimelech, right? As a matter of fact, it doesn't have much to do with Isaac. Beg your pardon? Hittite, not necessarily. Philistines and Hittites they can all be considered in a greater sense Canaanites, but they're not necessarily the same thing, I wouldn't think. Yeah.
So I'm always looking at law.
Yep.
We just got through talking about a covenant, right? Mm-hmm. I'm like, why is this guy doing? Why is Isaac doing this?
Uh-huh.
Like father, like son. Here's Esau having a wife, a covenant with somebody on land.
Somebody, what'd you say? I didn't hear what you
Esau is having a covenant, a marriage covenant. He gets a wife from someone who he's not being very insightful about who it is the suggestion here, right?
Yeah. Well, the best thing to do, of course, is to contrast the wife that Abraham chose for Isaac.
Yeah.
Right? He said, go get a wife from my brother's family. And he told old Eleazar, no matter what you do, do not let him get married to a Canaanite.
So did Isaac avail that possibility for Esau, or did Esau says, well, he doesn't care, or he doesn't seem to care, so I'm just going to marry the guys that are in the neighborhood, whoever's in the neighborhood.
Yeah, well, you'll notice that his parents don't seem to have been involved, right?
They're mad after the fact.
Yeah, because it says Esau was 40 years old and he married Judith the Canaanite and Basemath the Canaanite. First of all, he married 2 of them. They were both Canaanites. And then it says they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. I am sure that Isaac and Rebekah would have been glad to tell him that they that they didn't like this idea. But I think it implies that he never asked.
Well, he never asked, and they never. I mean, I'm trying to look at the possibility of defending Esau here.
Well,
Is
you
it
can
possible that they didn't proactively try to find a wife for him? And my point is, his father seems to be whimsical about entering in contracts with these guys.
Yeah, okay.
So what's the one more
he's
covenant?
busy out there messing around with the Philistines when he should be getting a wife for Esau.
Well, that too.
That too. Okay.
Yeah, I think when Esau, even though there was some healing between Isaac and Esau, I think there was some unforgiving spirit there. And
Why would there be any unforgiving spirit between Isaac and Esau?
because of the birthright episode.
Do you think Isaac knew about that and was mad at Esau for that?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, they were a source of spiritual rebellion, so there had to be still some contention that have not. There hasn't been any closure on the thing.
Fine, I can buy that. Well, no,
Yeah,
the birthright has. The blessing hasn't.
But we don't. And it's a good question whether Isaac ever knew about it before.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, that's true too.
Because they may not have wanted. He may not have wanted to tell him.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, I could, again, if you play my scenario through, I can imagine old Esau saying, well, that was just a silly discussion that Jacob and I had over a bowl of stew. It doesn't really mean anything.
Well, we haven't read it yet, but it's possible he didn't know because his intent is to bless Esau.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a great lead-in for where we are. I just like this sentence because of, number one, how it sticks out like a sore thumb in what we're reading, and number two, how it implies that, Esau wasn't particularly concerned about doing what his family or his mom and dad wanted him to do. It would appear. He found a couple of good-looking hussies out there in the neighborhood and decided to make them his wife.
Well, so it kind of asks you to make a connection. What is the connection? Is the contract? I think that's the similarity between the two.
Okay. So, now we get to the good chapter, chapter 27. So we won't have time to finish this, but I think it would be a good idea to read it and start it and start the discussion, and we'll finish the discussion next week. So, somebody want to read chapter 27. I don't want to read the whole thing, but I want to get through all the fun stuff. Let's go to about verse 24, through verse 24. The first 24 verses of chapter 27. Michael, read it.
and it came to be when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called Esau his elder son and said to him, "My son." And he answered him, "Here I am." And he said, "See now, I am old. I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your weapons, your quiver and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt wild game for me, and make me a tasty dish such as I love, and bring it to me to eat, in order that my being does bless you before I die." And Rebekah heard what Isaac spoke to Esau his son. Esau went to the field to hunt wild game and bring it. And Rebekah spoke to Jacob her son, saying, "See, I heard your father speak to Esau your brother, saying, 'Bring me wild game and make me a tasty dish to eat, and bless you in the presence of Yahweh before my death. And now, my son, listen to my voice according to what I command you. Please go to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, and I make a tasty dish from them for your father, such as he loves. And you shall take it to your father, and he shall eat it, so that he might bless you before his death.'" Where am I reading to, 18?
Actually, 24. Read through 24.
"And Jacob said to Rebekah his mother, 'See, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth-skinned man. What if my father touches me? Then I shall be like a deceiver in his eyes, and shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing.' But his mother said to him, 'Let your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go, get them for me. And he went and fetched them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made a tasty dish such as his father loved. And Rebekah took the best garments of her eldest son Esau, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the young goats in his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. Then she gave the tasty dish and the bread, which she had prepared, into the hands of her son Jacob. And he went to his father and said, My father. And he said, Here I am. Who are you, my son? And Jacob said to the father, I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you said to me. Please rise, sit, and eat of my wild game, so that your being might bless me. But Isaac said to his son, How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? And he said, Because Yahweh your Elohim brought it to me. Then Isaac said to Jacob, Please come near me so that I feel you, my son, whether you truly are my son Esau or not. And Jacob went near to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he did not recognize him, for his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, and he blessed him. And he said, Are you truly my son Esau? And he said, I am.
Okay, that's a good enough place to stop, because that's basically the do of the deed. So let's talk about this. This will be kind of fun. So it starts off, what's Isaac's condition at the beginning of this chapter? He's old and he can't see very well. Now, we'll do the math here in another succeeding chapter, but Isaac is not near death. He lives for 10 or 20 more years. So this is him making this up. He may be having a bad day. I'm not saying that, but yeah.
I get the impression that they think he's like, very old and just getting ready to die, because that's why he's doing the blessing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is like, this is the time to do it.
Yeah.
Before it's too late.
Yep.
So they think, I don't know. I think, and I don't think it's way more than 10 years. It's like 30 or 40 years.
Yeah, it's a
less.
long time.
So, I don't know.
Okay, so what you're saying is it may not be Isaac's idea?
No, I think he is. I think everybody thinks he's just about ready to die.
Yeah, including
Because-
him.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
oh, yeah.
Okay.
Because we'll read ahead. All of a sudden, he's like, something changes in him, and it's like he
Well, he just lives,
lives
a lot
another
more
40
years.
years. That's
I mean,
all.
I can kind of relate to that. Sometimes I feel like I'm about ready to die.
He found a really good supplement. And after that, it was, oh,
He started laying on the beamer.
He probably got a hold of a bad batch of wine.
Yeah. Ate too many Mexican food meals. All right. So anyway, is Isaac's old, his eyes are weak, he can't see well. He calls for Esau. And he says, Esau comes in, he says, Here I am. Isaac says, I'm an old man, I don't know the day of my death. Now get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food that I like, and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. So it's clear what the plan is, right? Yeah.
I never thought about this, but what's the point? Why is this important to have this meal? Why is it important to have this venison or whatever?
I don't think the meal is all that important. I think it's the blessing, of course, that's
Well,
important. And I think the meal is just an excuse to do it. It's to make it kind of special. Although you could argue that he could have just as easily said, Let me bless you.
Well, yeah. Plus, when you have a covenant, it's usually over a meal, and
Yeah.
way back in the covenant of the pieces involved
Yep.
them
Yep.
going through the meat.
So you're answering your own question, so to speak?
Well,
I mean, that's
I've been
fine.
accused of doing that, but I was just trying to see if somebody else would agree with me before
Okay.
I fully owned it, and then I could just walk away from it.
Okay.
I don't understand when he was told to go out into the wild and bring back some wild animals, but then later on, he went down to and brought back 2 coat kids. He went back down to the pastor.
No, it was
the pastor, to the pastor, and brought back 2 coats. He didn't go out into the wild and kill some wild game. He probably had some.
Well, Esau did. Esau went out and killed wild game. It was Jacob that killed the goats.
Okay.
Okay, the thing that some people bring up, though, along those lines is, how is it that Isaac couldn't tell the difference between wild game and goats?
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Go
He
ahead.
was old.
He was old, yeah.
Well, I wonder if maybe he knew about Esau's rejection, and this was kind of like a test to see if he really wants it. He's going to send him out to get some wild game. He's going to make him do something to get that blessing. He's not just going to give it to him.
That could be. That could be. That's a very interesting thought.
Because as we read on, well, I guess we'll read on, but
Yeah.
he seems to, after it's all said and done, be fine with Jacob having the blessing.
Yeah.
At the end of it all.
Yeah, we'll talk about that because that is a good question. But I like thinking about it from those terms.
Do we know how big his camp was? I mean,
Oh, I'm sure there were 100 people probably.
okay. Because when I read this time, you think about Rebecca cooking,
Yeah.
and Esau had just left, not too long ago.
Yeah.
And you'd think he could smell it.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
it was probably close by.
Oh, yeah, that's a very good point. That's a very good point. One of the questions that comes up, and I still don't have a good feeling one way or the other, is not only the question of whether does Isaac know about Esau's trading away the birthright, but does Isaac know about the prophecy that Yahweh gave Rebekah?
You would think so.
You would think so. I mean, but it didn't say that.
Was that your point, Mike? That he was trying to redeem him for what he had done?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
We
and,
don't-
and the Bible's clear, about saying Isaac really liked Esau because he was a man's man, liked to be hunting and all this kind of stuff, whereas Rebekah favored Jacob because he was more of a whatever. Yeah.
Something a little bit different than what you said earlier. To me, when I read this story, there's two things. There's the birthright and the double portion blessing that goes with it. That's how I read it. Maybe I'm not reading it accurate. They go together, but they're still separate things.
Okay. So
Birthright is like an office, a responsibility,
okay.
an obligation. The double portion is compensation for doing that office. That's
Okay.
how I read it.
Does the double portion go with the blessing or with the birthright?
Well, I'm merging blessing and double portion together.
Okay, that's fine. I don't have any reason to necessarily do it the other way. That was just my understanding, and I can't argue one way or the other. So what you're saying is this blessing would not only include God's blessing, but it would also include the double portion.
Yeah, I mean
That could
so
be.
you're talking about the like this is going to happen to you and these people will do these great things.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
what you mean by
Blessing.
Blessing.
Yeah.
Okay.
But-
I was thinking more of a
Blessing.
physical. This is how you do you need to be compensated for doing
You could
this.
be right. Like I say, I don't know enough about it to act like I should or do. So you could be right. In a lot of ways, that makes more sense. Anyway, so he sends off Esau, go out and shoot some deer or something, and bring it back and cook it that special way you do that thing you do, and bring it to me so I can eat it, right, and bless you. And obviously, God's not in here at all, right? So they're doing this all on their own, and the impression you get, at least the impression I have, is Isaac decided on his own this is something he wanted to do. So he did it. He moves ahead with it. But just so happens that Rebekah happened to be hanging around listening, right? And so when she heard about this, she goes to Jacob and she says, what she says in end of verse 6 is, "Look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of Yahweh before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go out to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. And then take it to your father to eat so that he may give you his blessing before he dies." So Rebekah says, well, I know the prophecy that God gave me when these twins were, having battles in my womb. And he clearly said that Jacob is the guy that's going to have the birthright and the blessing. I'm making this up, but that's what I think Rebekah thinks. And I don't care what Isaac thinks. I'm not letting him get away with that. So this is her plan to fix that. Yeah.
So Rebecca doesn't, I think Glenn McWilliams kind of makes the argument that Mike was saying, that this is just not really maybe it isn't that big of a deal. He's just trying to get, Isaac is trying to get Esau back in the good standing with the family. And so he's doing this thing which he's good at, going to get venison.
Yeah.
It's like falling off a log for him, so that's easy. But Rebecca doesn't look at it. What you just read,
Yeah.
Rebecca's taking this thing very serious.
Yeah.
This isn't just I'm going to be nice to my son
Yeah.
kind of thing. And she brings up the fact that it's on his deathbed. So this is a passing of the covenant, it seems to me.
Yes.
Is that fair?
Yes, I definitely agree. Now, what's Jacob's response when Rebekah tells him about this?
What
He'll
should have
never
been
fall for it.
what should have been his response is, "You're crazy, lady. I'm not doing this."
Yeah, that should have been his response. Hey, man, I don't want any part of that. But it says, Jacob, verse 11, Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." So that's a long way of saying he'll never fall for it, right?
Well, and it isn't. Gee, isn't this wrong?
Yeah, no. So this won't work. That'll never work.
What's that story about? Am I my brother's keeper?
No. So what does she say? What does Rebekah say? Now, Jacob is saying, I'll get a curse and not a blessing. So Rebekah says, may whatever curse happens fall on me. And it did, yeah.
So how does she have the authority to do that?
She doesn't.
She recognizes that it's the father who has the authority to bring the blessings, and now she's claiming she has the authority to accept the curse.
Yeah. She's obviously speaking from whence she knows not.
Maybe the birthright and the blessing had to go together, and maybe for some reason, I don't know why, Isaac would offer it if he knew about, he'd already given up his birthright. I don't know why he would say that, go out and kill me a deer and I'll bless you.
Yeah.
That doesn't.
That's a
make
good
sense
point.
to me.
That's a good point. I will point out there is a school of thought that I kind of buy into about, I think the birthright and the blessing should go together, but I think they often don't. And I think you could make a case for the fact that they don't with the whole nation of Israel. Because I think, let's see if I get this right. I think, Ephraim got the double portion, but Judah got the birthright. Because Judah will be the scepter will always be in Judah's hands, if you will, however that goes.
Actually,
Whereas
Ephraim got the
double
birthright.
portion. Beg your pardon?
Ephraim got the birthright.
Yeah.
You said Judah.
Well, the scepter shall not pass. Is that the birthright, or that's not the blessing? Ephraim got the double portion, the blessing. Ephraim got the blessing, whatever it includes. Judah got the birthright. Did I say it wrong?
1 Chronicles 5 says Ephraim.
Okay.
You can
But
read it.
the point I was trying to make, and obviously poorly, was that they're separated now. So I think it's not always the case that they're the same. I think it's God's design that they be the same. They be in the same person, if you will. But I don't think they are. You could also make that case for Joseph and Judah.
I'll find it real quick if you want.
No, I think all of this goes back to my lack of thorough understanding
It's
of the
1
birthright
Chronicles
and the
5.
blessing.
It says, birthright was given to the sons of Joseph, son of Israel. It was talking about Reuben, actually, why he didn't get it.
Okay.
But anyways, I was thinking with Rebekah, if Jacob, he did get the blessing, he didn't get a curse. So there was no curse to fall on her, was there?
Well, that's fair, but there was certainly, how can I put this? There was a curse of sorts.
She had a kind of a rough time afterwards because Jacob had to leave, and she's stuck with her two daughter-in-laws.
Exactly. Jacob had to leave. She was stuck with her two daughter-in-laws, and she never saw Jacob again. So that's a blessing, or curse, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think she took back in back in chapter 25, 23, when Yahweh had spoken to her about the two nations and the elders serving the younger. I think she took that as kind of a commission to facilitate this to happen.
Yep. So what you're saying, it's much the way Sarah went to Abraham and said, why don't you go into Hagar, and we'll have the heir that way. Yeah, is that what you mean? Yeah. I think she's trying to help God. Rebecca says, I can fix you. This is not working out the way it's supposed to, God. I'll take care of it.
Yeah, maybe instead of a curse, she sacrificed herself because she knew from the very beginning. I mean, the prophecy was given to her.
Yeah.
So she knew better than as. What do you say, Isaac? He's just out there. What? What'd you say he was doing? Oh. But Isaac is just kind of like, it's almost like he's like oblivious to a lot of stuff.
Yeah. How about them?
How about them Cowboys? But but I used to think a lot of times with Rebecca and Jacob that this is just a bad thing that they did, but in a way I think it's not such a bad thing.
Well, their hearts were in the right place. They were just
she
going about it
knew,
wrong. Yeah.
So she knew she had to do something. Now, you could make the case that God will work things out one way or the other. He's already chosen Jacob. But,
well, as a matter of fact,
but one thing I like about when you read these Bible stories, they never make a judgment call on whether it's right or wrong. In a lot of ways, it's just a story, you know, and then you need to glean.
That's the
what
best
to
part
learn.
of this. Yeah, that's what we're doing, is we're trying to determine what goes on here. And your comment about how, God could have made it work out anyway, I would take it exactly back to the story of Esther. And when, the Mordecai comes to her and tells her she needs to go to the king and plead for her people, and she says, but, if I could die. And he says, well, rest assured that if you don't do this, God will save his people somehow. But how do you know that you weren't born for a time such as this? How do you know that this is not yours to do? Now, it's different circumstance and lots of different vectors floating around, but I guess my point is it occurs to me that it's not unreasonable to believe that God would have taken care of it. I mean, we don't have any idea how, and you sure can't see how, because it looked like Isaac was intent on doing this, but you got to believe that God would have. Rebecca didn't have to do this.
I just wanted to point out, so whenever the things that we learned about a sacrifice is that something dies in place of something else.
Mm-hmm.
So just like Yeshua, he took the curse upon himself. Cursed is him who hangs on the tree. So he took our curse. Well, she's doing the same thing by being a willing offering. She's a willing offering to step in his place and take that for him. So somehow that has to play into effect by saying, I will stand in your place regarding that curse.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And even though the way it's rendered in English, is like, don't worry about it. Any curse that happens, I'll take it. Makes it just sound like she's dismissing it. You're right. Well, yeah.
What does this say to us about our spoken words?
Oh, yeah.
If these words could not be taken back because they were spoken, how carelessly I myself let things come out of my mouth.
Oh, here.
And I probably need to take a look at this, that, to me it looks like, I could have just said something else. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that to the wrong person. Here, let me just do this. But this clearly shows us that they did not view it that way.
Yep. That's a good point. Now,
doesn't that happen to Jacob when he unknowingly curses Rachel?
Yes, absolutely.
Because
because she's got her father's idols.
Right.
Yep. This is an absolutely horrible thing to do, and I'm going to enjoy doing it. So we got to quit. So you need to go home and think about this and read about it and talk about it, and we'll finish the story next week. And you'll have all kinds of opinions because you've been sitting here noodling on this. This is a great story. The thing that's really cool to me is, first of all, Jacob's eventually gets the name changed to Israel, and Israel is what we follow after this. The rest of the entire book of Genesis is about Israel. It's not about these guys, okay? And this one event right here has a tremendous impact. It changes the course of Jacob's life forever. And we'll talk about how big a change it made in his life and how everything happened based on this one story. So it's great. So you go think about that. Let me close in prayer. Father God, thank you for your Torah. Thank you for these stories. Thank you that they teach us things that we can hardly even know how to put back into words. They're not really commands, but they're insights into you and your character and into how you want us to behave, into what real faith and trust means. And Father God, it just makes us understand how much greater you are than we are or will ever be. I just thank you for loving us. I thank you for your Torah. I thank you for this group of believers that are seeking you, God. And I ask that you just bless us for our efforts. Keep us safe until we meet together again next week. In Yahushua's name, amen. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Jerry.
Esther, I think, has somehow or another found some extra pizzas. So